Are you ready to become a change maker? Our 48-week postgraduate program in public policy or the PGP may be just the thing for you. This hybrid program is designed to give you both the theoretical foundation and hands-on experience needed to excel in policy making. With a mix of expert-led webinars, in-person workshops, and policy simulation exercises, you'll gain real-world skills along with personalized mentorship. Through our policy programs, we connect good people to good ideas and good networks. Apply now at the link in the description to make an impact.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. My name is Shobhankita, and I'm a research analyst with Takshashila's Technology Geopolitics program. I'm joined in this episode by Aditya Ramanathan, who's our Head of Military Affairs and Outer Space program here at Takshashila. There's much we do not know about the recent military escalations between India and Pakistan. Full details about the losses taken, costs imposed, the targets hit or suffered will only be clear in the coming weeks or even months. There's much that's still covered in fog. There's also a lot of misinformation being peddled. Regardless, from what we can piece together about the weapon systems and the missile systems deployed, Aditya, you have written about how in India we have much to be happy about. My first query to you is, what have we learned about our capabilities vis-a-vis that of our adversary from the recent military escalations? For example, some of our missiles made their debut in combat in the recent military conflict. It was really their first time being deployed in active combat. A lot of us, we don't want to see military conflict, we don't want to see combat. But the real honest truth is that unless we have one, we ourselves don't know where our capabilities lie, what our strengths and weaknesses are vis-a-vis that of the adversary, and if the weapon systems even work as expected. So really, maybe you can set some context in what we have learned about our military capabilities vis-a-vis the Pakistanis and that of the Chinese.
Sure. Thanks so much, Shubhankita. Yeah, war is obviously a very grim affair, but it's obviously in battle, like you mentioned, that these things are ultimately tested. India's used a combination of foreign made as well as Indian munitions and platforms in this confrontation. So we've seen, of course, the usual mix of Indian aircraft. So apparently Rafales, Mirage 2000s, those are French-made aircraft plus Su-30 MKIs. These are what we've heard of being used. I'm sure other aircraft were used because these are complex operations that are aircraft that are providing escort, that are doing diversions. There's a lot more aircraft involved in these operations than the ones that are actually just delivering the munitions. So that's one thing. Then in terms of the munitions themselves, India used a couple of French weapons, the Scalp and the Hammer. And both of these are fairly compact standoff weapons. So one's a air-launched cruise missile, the other's a sort of standoff bomb. And they both seem to have worked well in the sense that they hit their intended targets and they went off, they detonated. They both have fairly compact warheads, and I think that definitely informed India's choice here because the initial targets on May 7th were in urban areas, and that's just unavoidable because that's where terrorists have their facilities, their bases, their facilities for recruitment, training, everything, right? So, you don't want to create a bigger blast or create more destruction than is absolutely necessary. So, I think for that reason, it was a wise choice on the part of the Indian Air Force. What we've seen after that is, Pakistani retaliation came in its own strange ways. In fact, in the first wave of Pakistani retaliations, they in fact denied that they were doing anything, but it was very evident that something was going on. This seems to be the result of what seems to be a deep-seated belief in the Pakistani military that information ops, as they call it, are really crucial. So if you deny such an attack, it muddies the waters. It creates confusion potentially in the enemy. The enemy being India, and it also muddies the waters about who's retaliating against whom when. Right. But anyway, we all know this happened. Seems to happen in two ways. One, the first night there was some drone incursions, and these seem to have been meant to just test air defenses, probe for weaknesses, and after that, uh, there was a volley of about 6 missiles fired at different locations. Again, the details are unclear, but it would seem, given the fact that we had no impacts noticed in India, you can't keep that secret. All of them seem to have been intercepted. The following day, there were something like 300 to 400 drones, according to the Indian Air Force, used in something like 36 different locations. So this wasn't necessarily a big swarm going at one location. The Pakistanis seem to have chosen to do a sort of diffuse incursion. Again, the idea seems to have been to probe Indian air defenses, because that's useful for a potential future attack. That, again, does not seem to have had much success from the Pakistanis. It's possible that they did gain some information that might be useful to them in the future, but as far as we know, a lot of these were intercepted through both kinetic and non-kinetic means. Non-kinetic, you mean, simply things like jamming, because these are a small, rotary wing UAVs that are dependent on communication links with their operators. So they are susceptible to some kind of jamming. Besides that, others seem to have been brought down with regular anti-aircraft guns, like the upgraded Bofors L-70, which it's an really old weapon, but it's been upgraded with a programmable fuse that it's a proximity fuse that basically goes off near once it detects the target, and it explodes in a cloud of fragments, little tungsten bits that can go and damage those UAVs, small drones. Besides that, India also has several other anti-aircraft guns, the Zu-23, the Shilka. So, the usual Indian mix of Western and Russian hardware. And that seems to have actually done a lot of the job. Besides that, India also does have shoulder-launched short-range surface-to-air missiles, some of which are not shoulder-launched anymore. There are specific mounts and electronic trackers for them, and those also seem to have worked. And what seems to have worked with the initial missile volleys, largely the usual complement of Akash missiles and perhaps the MR-SAMs. The most serious Pakistani missile volley came on the very last day. And again, the details are scarce. We've heard of the S-400 being used. The S-400 is being the Russian air defense system, which has multiple missiles. So we don't know what missile was used. It's also unclear what was engaged, if anything. But there are reports that the S-400 was used. And we also have heard that a Pakistani Fatah-2 missile, this is the one where we have some concrete evidence, at least concrete statements. A Fatah-2 missile was fired. This is a flat trajectory ballistic missile or short-range ballistic missile. In that, most ballistic missiles go on a fairly parabolic flight path. This is fairly flat. And it's a purely conventional missile. There's no confusion there. And it seems to have been intercepted by a Barak 8 MR-SAM missile. That's pretty impressive, the fact that happened. So overall, it would seem that like this multi-layered Indian air defense system actually functioned pretty well. What's interesting is that while this has not been this is not something that just happened yesterday. It's really a process over decades. The Akash missile has been in development for a long time. Several types of radars for the last 20 years. There's been steady development, back and forth, and then finally induction into the armed forces. But we've also seen in the last 5 to 10 years some important things happen. One of them is just putting together. It's essentially information fusion. So the IAF, for example, has its own integrated command and control system, and that's in the process of being merged with the Army's own Akash Tir, which is a series of platforms, that basically help you build a picture of the air defense environment. So you have a combination of information from civil radars, Air Force radars, and Army radars all coming together to build a broad picture of the air defense environment. And that has definitely helped coordinate and largely beat off these threats. Another thing is that a lot of these drones seem to have been brought down by the still nascent counter UAS system that's there in India. UAS meaning unmanned aerial systems like drones, and that's something run by the army. And it's really since 2021 insurgent attack that this started being developed in earnest. There were developments before that, but that's when it started coming to being in the form that we understand today. And it's still in a nascent phase, but so far it seems to have equated itself quite well. So all of this is good news.
Right. So the ability of aircrafts and missiles to strike deep into the adversary's territory, bypassing the front lines of defense, and to do that precisely. And at the same time, for our air defenses to shield some of our targets. We saw both of that happening in this recent volley. But again, this is not a time for complacency because there are challenges ahead of us. For example, in the conflicts in West Asia and Europe, in Armenia, Azerbaijan, or the Russia Ukraine conflict, what we see is that the character of war is changing. More sophisticated tech is being deployed, more inexpensive methods to deter the enemy and impose punitive costs are coming up. So we must keep ourselves updated about these details, about how war is changing, because clearly China and Pakistan are also watching. They're taking notes and they will adapt. So, Aditya, what are these potential challenges? What do you foresee will trouble us in the future?
Sure. Yeah. Character of war is always changing. What we're seeing is some really significant changes in the air defense environment, the air environment in general, in the last few years. This is something that happens historically from period to period. And I think some of this is well known. We've already seen the two conflicts between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and followed by the second Russia-Ukraine war. And there are some common threats. One, I think the one that gets the most attention, to some extent deservedly so, is what we, the catch-all term that we use called drones, right? Though, of course, when we say drones, we mean everything from little commercial quadcopters to things that are basically aircraft that don't have pilots in them. But a lot of these drones that we're talking about are fairly inexpensive platforms that do a lot of the jobs that would have been done by, for example, helicopters, as well as some standoff, traditional standoff weapons like missiles. The flip side is that a lot of these are easy to intercept. So once you figure out your defenses, I mean, like India has, there is a risk of overstating the effect of these type of weapons, because while you can surge them in large numbers, it's likely that in the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of countries, including India, will essentially try to flip the exchange ratio. What I mean is, it often costs more to destroy these platforms than they actually cost. But you're going to flip that with all sorts of things, jamming, high-powered microwaves, just things like having simple proximity fuses on traditional anti-aircraft artillery, just having electro-optical tracking mounted onto things like 50 caliber machine guns, stuff like that. That can actually take care of some of these threats. But it is a huge difference. I mean, let's just go back to the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, a little over 3 years back. Most of us expected Russia to gain air supremacy fairly soon. By air supremacy, we mean that they would be unchallenged in the air. That didn't happen, and that's partly because the Russians suffered some setbacks in trying to suppress Ukrainian air defenses. So some air defenses of Ukraine remains surprisingly resilient. Now, to be clear, Ukraine is not really fielding an effective fixed-wing piloted aircraft air force anymore, but it's found other ways, to fight back. So it's got its ground-based air defenses. Those have been supplemented massively in the last 3 years by Western hardware. Without that Western hardware, and we can get to this later, but the Ukrainians would not have been able to intercept those large missile and UAV volleys that Russia flung against both military and infrastructure targets. And so what we've seen, I think, from these wars is the increased use of these attritable or expendable platforms like UAVs, greater use of standoff weapons, missiles, long-range drones, and the likes. and also the surprising effectiveness of air defenses in all of this. And I think all three of them are evident in the Russia-Ukraine war. Two of them, we haven't seen very effective air defenses necessarily in the two wars between Azerbaijan and Armenia, but we've seen them in between Russia and Ukraine. We've seen them in the conflicts between Iran and Israel, and we've seen them now between India and Pakistan. So I think those are trends we can comfortably take away as of now. I think what this means is that to meaningfully run an air force or to have standoff capabilities doesn't necessarily mean the answer for that is not necessarily just fixed wing aircraft. A lot of pilots may not like to hear that, but that's just the reality that we're facing. So and that is not necessarily bad news for India when you think about where India goes from here, right? So we have our number of authorized squadrons in the Air Force is 42. We're actually at more like 30 to 31 squadrons right now. A squadron has about 18 aircraft. But even those, like some of those squadrons are not fully functional because, I don't know how much of this is public, but like sometimes there's cannibalization of parts and things like that. Also, that strength is going to go down this year and next year because the last 50 odd MiG-21 Bisons that India has are finally going to go out of service. So you are going to have a shortfall in the number of aircraft you need, and the reason the Air Force came up with a number of 42 is because that's actually what you need to cover this these two fronts. Basically, you have both China and Pakistan on the continental and maritime fronts, right? It's a huge geography to cover, and so the 42 squadrons is actually designed to address that. So it's not just a number randomly picked out of somewhere. So if you are to get to that, you are going to, or have to find some replacement for that. We are going to have to think creatively. I don't think anybody expects that we will reach 42 squadrons in the next 10 years. We'll probably reach something like 35 squadrons. We have now the MRFA program to get a new bunch of Rafales and all that. And that's the good part about that. The good part about having a small number of capable aircraft is that they can, make up for numbers in a crucial theater, right? So typically, conflict doesn't take place across an entire front all the time. There's usually specific places where you need to surge firepower, and so if you can do that, it works. So we have to think of some creative ways of getting around this. So one answer might be to just develop and have more standoff weapons. India's had more success there. So we've talked about the BrahMos missile. There's the so-called new generation BrahMos missile, which will be about half the weight of the current one. So each aircraft will be able to carry a lot more. Even the Tejas will be actually able to carry, I think, 2 of the new generation BrahMos missiles. So that's a lot of firepower. Then we'll also have presumably a BrahMos 2 missile at some point. I don't know. It's going to require some Russian cooperation. But the idea being that it would be a hypersonic missile, would be potentially cruise at more than 5 times the speed of sound. So that makes it really difficult to intercept. So all of these are potentially great missiles. But we also have things like India's own Nirbhay missile, so the Nirbhay cruise missile. There's going to be a newer version of that, a newer, larger, long-range version of it that's under development. So all of these things will give you the kind of standoff capabilities that can compensate to some extent for having an understrength fixed-wing aircraft fleet. But you still need to be in the air, right? So, the advantage of being in the air is that you can get from one place to another really quickly. And a lot of these standoff weapons are best delivered from aircraft themselves. So we're going to have to think about some potential options. One might be simply to I think like one thing India should focus on is getting more uninhabited combat aerial vehicles, UCAVs. So basically UAVs that can carry payloads and deliver them. Let me put this really crudely. I think we need a lot more UAVs, including one-way kamikaze UAVs, in the price range of something like $100,000 to $20 million, right, per pop. So having a lot of those will help you to take care of some of the really difficult tasks that air power is sometimes asked to do. One is suppression of enemy air defenses, which we've seen in this conflict. So India made fairly skillful use of something called the Harap, which is a loitering munition from Israel, and seem to have definitely at least had some success in Lahore with that. So, but you're going to need a lot more of those type of standoff capabilities because, look, the real challenge is not hitting something in Lahore or Karachi. It's really Tibetan Plateau. It's in the maritime domain because the real challenge over the long term is going to be China. And I don't think people are overstating it much when they say that this was, in a sense, like a proxy war fought with China because your adversary was using Chinese hardware to a great extent, was definitely benefited from long-term intelligence cooperation with China and so on, right? So Pakistan is heavily dependent on that. So we need to think ahead for this, right? Because suppressing air defenses, for example, on the Tibetan Plateau is going to be a much more difficult ball game. So you're going to have a lot of mobile radar systems. It's just a difficult environment to operate in. So that's something we need to build capabilities for, despite the fact that we have this. We are going to have an understrength air force for the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, right. Air power is fungible in the sense that when required, aircrafts can be quickly moved from one front or station to another and to the focus area in question. And so, despite the shortage in squadrons as compared to what was commissioned, using what we have creatively, innovatively, improving our operational agility, this is something that we can focus on. Would you agree with this?
Yes, I mean, given the constraints that India has, yeah, that's I think what we should do. That's something India is very used to, right? So we talked about how India's basically been using the MiG-21 BIS, now the basically MiG-21 in some form or the other for the last 50 years. Now the two really aging platforms, for example, are the Jaguars, Sapicat Jaguars, and the Mirage 2000s. The Jaguars, again, first squadron I think was received its aircraft in 1981. And it's been around for a long time, but of course they've gone through, for example, the Jaguars have gone through an extensive upgrade, a so-called Darren 3, which it's a whole new computer electronic interface system, and some upgrades to the avionics, to ability to do precision strikes and things like that. And even then, we are aware that these aircraft have limitations. So, which is why, for example, India would like to focus aircraft like the Jaguar on less contested air defense environments like the maritime sector. So you have to use this intelligently, and I think India has been doing that. But ultimately, reason you build this military power is precisely so you don't have to use it. I mean, that's the paradox of it. So you want to build enough strength that you can create complicated enough problems that your adversaries decide not to use force against you. Right? And that ultimately requires that somewhere those constraints have to give way. So ultimately, we are unfortunately likely to need greater defense spending in India. I'm not someone who likes a lot of government spending, but this is something that it has to happen, and it's better to get a head start on it now rather than later. And this is not something that we've been saying after this crisis. We've been saying this before this crisis. So it's better to get a head start on it now because it requires a few years both to absorb new hardware. Also, we would like to be able to use that money to invest it into India's own defense ecosystem, right? So we'd like local production where possible, design, and as much joint ventures with foreign partners as possible. So all of that requires a few years for it to happen. Transforming wealth into power, while power is fungible, that takes time. So it's useful to get a head start on it now. Another reason I'll point this out is because we have now committed, in the case of Pakistan, to conventional responses in the event of mass casualty terrorist attacks. We haven't actually specified a threshold, but I guess we'll know it when we see it. Now, if you don't want to keep doing this every few years, it makes sense to actually invest so that you have that conventional superiority over Pakistan, right? And it's also wise to invest in things that work for both your adversaries, right? So I'm not asking for more armor in the Western theater, along Rajasthan. I think that's not the wisest allocation of money. What we need is, for example, things like Airpower, which is fungible and can be used in both fronts.
Right. So we have had reforms in the defense industry, the opening of the industry to private players, including startups, the defense acquisition procedures clearly laid out in the recent past. All of this has already happened, but of course, it will take time for this to fructify. We have seen our defense exports increase, and this is a welcome change from the time that India was a major importer of defense equipments. But regardless, for the returns for some of these new policies to come in the form of incorporation into the armed forces and so on, it is all very nascent and it will take time. Aditya, I want to ask a specific question about China here, because China is likely to field fifth generation aircrafts with stealth capabilities such as that of the J-20, the J-35. Pakistan is already in talks to buy some of these aircrafts. And if reports are to be believed, China had done some preliminary testing of their sixth generation aircrafts early this year. The Indian equivalent of this will take a long time, at least a decade, before it's operational and inducted into the armed forces. So, what are our real options here? We have spoken about UCAVs, the need for more defense spending, and possibly some of this increased defense spending will come from other areas, right? I mean, not necessarily the defense budget alone, but it takes a whole of government approach. For example, maybe we could look at rationalizing centrally sponsored schemes. We could cut subsidies that may not have some merit or relevance today. Perhaps even disinvestment from non-strategic firms. It will take a whole government approach for sure. And the other approach perhaps is leveraging our strategic partnerships in the West. This is an advantage that China does not enjoy. But what are our other options in this regard?
Well, the challenge with the J-20 or J-35 or potentially the J-36 or whatever else China has in store is basically because they're low radar observability platforms. It means a fair amount of reorientation of your air defenses, right? So we should not get really complacent and start thinking about and start just preparing to fight the next war like it's the last war. So we're going to have to think about how we detect these platforms, what you do when these platforms get through. We've already seen, for example, the Israelis had a fair amount of success with the F-35s, which is a fifth generation aircraft in their war with Iran last year. And so you're going to have to start thinking what can be done. As of now, there are no magic bullet solutions to easily and detect stealth aircraft and engage them. There are all sorts of tricks. There's also some experiments going on in a lot of countries with radars in certain bands of VHF, UHF, all sorts of other sensors, including potentially acoustic sensors. But it's a work in progress. And another really promising avenue for trying to detect stealth aircraft are passive radars, which basically look for emissions from other types of radiation that bounce off these stealth aircraft, right? So, but again, these are technologies that may come into fruition at some point, but it'll take some time for that to happen. So until that happens, the reality is that the countries that have these kind of aircraft will have an advantage for several years. And that's not a good position for India. So while India does have those advantages that you mentioned, to develop its own fifth generation aircraft, or we have something called AMCA in the works with DRDO. Firstly, we have to make the choice in India to do that international cooperation. I'm not sure it's happening to the extent I would like, because I think we need to speed up this process, and you need to get access to the best technology. So there's several things involved. There's the design of the aircraft, where you have multiple trade-offs. So you want to be able to deflect radar reflections, but also keep the aircraft aerodynamic, be able to have sufficient payload, have it maneuverable with the engines it has. So, there's a lot of trade-offs involved with stealth aircraft. On top of that, the stealth aircraft also need other things like radar absorbent material, which absorbs some of the radiation which is not deflected. And basically all of that is meant to make it really hard to detect these type of aircraft when they make incursions. Unfortunately, there's likely to be a lag in between before India is able to wield similar aircraft. And while we can speed up that process through international cooperation and all of that, which we should do, I'm not sure that we have clear solutions on hand right now. So all we can do is basically look at, well, what are other countries doing with, for example, detection of stealth aircraft, engaging them. What type of missiles, for example, do you use? Most of these longer range missiles use what it's called active or semi-active radar, right? So again, to what extent are these going to work with these semi-stealth fifth, sixth generation aircraft? It's not clear at the moment. There are some areas where these aircraft are vulnerable. They all have engine exhaust. When weapons payloads open, they start becoming more detectable. All of this happens. So, but how do you engage them? I don't think there are any clear answers right now. So, we might be in a situation where you basically accept that some of these aircraft will get through, and you have to figure out how to deal with that, how to live with that. I'll just say that it's something we have to more broadly be used to. I mean, so even if we're not talking about stealth aircraft, for example, China wields a whole panoply of standoff weapons, long-range cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, all with conventional warheads that would, for example, be highly effective against any type of fixed facilities like air bases. So, we do need to seriously think through. I mean, the Air Force is thinking this through, but this needs to be something that is well understood. The fact that you can have attrition fairly early in a conflict or at some stage in a conflict, where you could suddenly lose a large portion of your facilities for maintaining and keeping aircraft in the air, as well as the aircraft themselves. And so, what do you do? What do you do then? There have been experiments with trying to fly these aircraft from national highways and the likes. But yeah, again, all of this is going to require a lot more imagination. I think we have to, our air defenses are presently designed for sustained combat. We need to be prepared for really brutal attrition with our fixed wing air power as well, with our aircraft. That's really crucial in order to be able to fight despite taking lots of losses. And that, having that ability is ultimately what convinces your adversary, hopefully, that it's not worth getting into a fight at all.
Yeah. My takeaway from this conversation is that in the recent conflict, we have much to be heartened about. We have seen multi-layered air defenses, precision attacks deep inside the adversary's landmass. And this should give us confidence that despite some of these challenges, we can rise to the occasion in the future. It's not all dim and no hope. And it will entail difficult decisions. It will entail difficult choices. We are a heavily manned armed force, and a huge part of our defense spending today goes in servicing pensions and salaries with very little for new acquisitions. But we need to keep looking for more innovative, creative ways to impose costs and deter the enemy. And maybe we don't need to match like for like in capability with the adversary. That would be ideal, but also difficult given our current constraints. But we need to keep looking for these innovative, inexpensive, sophisticated, asymmetric options to be able to hurt the adversary in a prolonged conflict, enough to deter them in the first place. And that way, perhaps, we can constrain Pakistan and China and, on both our fronts, really.
Yes, I certainly hope so. Look, India's been through all sorts of really rough situations in the past. So I certainly think we will pull through this one. I think what's unprecedented this time is simply the growing power differential between India and China. And that's not going to suddenly disappear. But what India can meaningfully do is shrink the gap in military power, because China's power is diffused. It has other things to also deal with. And India has certain geographical advantages. So we should take advantage of those, deploy our power, build our power in intelligent ways so we can shrink that differential and hopefully maintain the peace.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Aditya. This was insightful. I learned a lot.
Thank you. That's awesome.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.